Hello and welcome to The Real USA. Today we're in Silver Spring County, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. We thank you for your interest in the program and in these stories brought to you from the United States and told in a way that only Telesur could do. I'm Alexandra Hall. As you watch the show, I invite you to share your comments and suggestions via our Twitter at Telesur English. Let's get started. When we think about homelessness, we often just think about adults, but homelessness is an issue that also affects many children here in the United States. According to a recent study by the National Center for Family Homelessness, last year, nearly 1 in 30 children in the United States experienced homelessness, and those numbers have skyrocketed just in the past 5 years. Our correspondent Mary McCarthy has the story.
Never in my wildest dreams. I never thought I would ever be homeless.
Donna was recently evicted from her apartment after a minor dispute with the landlord. She's the age of a grandmother, but busy raising a niece and nephew, and the three of them suddenly no longer had a home.
Always worried about the kids. You know, we can't do this because of the kids. I can't do, so my kids were always number one.
Nationwide studies show their case is far from rare.
In Metro Denver, from some of the studies, families are the majority of the homeless population, which often is shocking to many people because you don't always see families out on the streets. You might see individuals, you might have a male stereotype, but you don't always see, a mom and 2 kids walking around or panhandling or anything like that.
Even in a region with one of the strongest economies in the U.S., the effects of the 2008 financial downturn and mortgage crisis are still being felt, with homeless shelters in the Denver area full to capacity.
The top reasons in Metro Denver for homelessness are job loss and home loss. And the third reason is actually a family breakup. So it can be an illness, it can be a death, it can be a divorce, things like that. And a lot of times what families experience are a cycle of different things. So maybe one thing happens, leads to another thing, and then they can't get out of that cycle.
Donna, 12-year-old Kilea, and 10-year-old Bernard bounced from one hotel to another, and after a few months got a place in this transitional housing shelter. Here they share a single room and have access to the in-house cafeteria and this entertainment area for children.
When we got here, all we had was the clothes on our back.
Kilea and Bernard say living in hotels was hard.
Because there really wasn't a way for us to get to school.
Now they still have a long bus journey to school, but overall they like living here.
The food is good sometimes. Most of the time, no. I made a lot of friends.
I got to make new friends.
Experts say that homelessness can have a traumatic effect on young people.
A lot of times they have to grow up too fast. There are situations they have to go through that maybe not everyday kids have to go through, like sleeping in a car, sleeping in motels, taking care of younger siblings.
Donna hopes that within the next year she'll get into low-income housing and the kids can get some of the stability and space they desperately need.
I'd just like to move from here into low-income housing somewhere. It would be nice to be in our own place again, where the kids can have their own bedroom.
In 2010, the U.S. federal government announced a program aiming to eradicate child and family homelessness by 2020. But with the number of young people without stable housing on the rise, that goal seems further and further out of reach. Mary McCarthy for Telesur, Denver.
Every year in the United States, child poverty rates continue to rise. According to a recent study by UNICEF, approximately 1 in 5 children in the United States is currently living in poverty. Our correspondent William Denslow reports from North Carolina, a state where the statistics are a daily reality.
From canned soup to instant noodles, volunteers are packing up weekend meals for around 1,800 children that struggle to get enough to eat at home. And with around a quarter of North Carolina's children in poverty, they're much valued supplies.
It is a way to stabilize them, and it's a way that they can enter the classroom Monday mornings food secure. They're not hungry, they're not irritable, they're better behaved, and they learn faster.
Children go where I send thee.
On top of the decline of manufacturing, the recession hit many in North Carolina hard. While towns like Raleigh are booming again, many in the state still struggle to make ends meet, and it's having a huge impact on their children.
For kids who grow up without economic security, they're more likely to drop out of high school, less likely to go to college, and less likely to have economic security for the families that they create.
For many mothers, providing for their families isn't just about finding work. Working as a cashier at a gas station, Heather says she works up to 7 days a week, supporting a man on disability insurance and her 3 young children. Living paycheck to paycheck, they say earning a few extra dollars an hour would make the world of difference.
If I had a few bucks more, I could put money back and save money for all 3 of the girls for college, for, a car when they turn 16 or, stuff like that.
Over recent years, jobs have returned to the state, but many are low paying, with wages many say can barely sustain a family. So while the state's economy may be showing signs of growth, for thousands of hard-working people, they're struggling to see the benefits. And it's a problem that experts say affect those that are most vulnerable.
We're the richest, but we pay the smallest degree of attention to those who are locked out and at the bottom. And then we still turn around and say this is the home of liberty and justice for all.
At this food bank in North Carolina, they say a third of the people they serve are children. For aid agencies, they say this simply isn't acceptable and feel major changes are needed to address this problem. With such high levels of child poverty in North Carolina, members of food banks like this have a simple request: to raise the minimum wage so families can not only feed their children, but give them a chance to escape this cycle of poverty. William Denslow, Telesaur, in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Race relations can be controversial here in the United States. It's often manifested in the form of racial discrimination against African Americans. Some of the recent cases were the deaths of Michael Brown, Eric Garner, and Trayvon Martin. But many people are unfamiliar with the relationship between Africans and African Americans. Filmmaker Perez Owino recently made a documentary that explored these very issues.
Now in its 22nd year, the New York African Diaspora International Film Festival opened with a particularly topical film, Supremacy, a true story about a white supremacist on the run after killing a black cop.
Can I see your identification, please?
Get out! We are living serious moments in this country in which we see that certain individuals take the liberty of killing other people, the liberty of denigrating other people, and this is a film that brings that analysis to the forefront with a lot of imagination and know-how.
The film's director, Dion Taylor, felt similarly.
There's no time more important than right now with what's going on in the world, race-wise, from Ferguson to Trayvon Martin. Anytime you have a movie that deals with race, you have to be aware that there's going to be a lot of race questions.
This was true for Kenyan-born director Perez Owino, whose documentary, Bound, Africans versus African Americans, deals with questions of race and unexpected cross-cultural tensions.
Americans don't understand the African cultures because we was never taught it.
Yes.
The things we were taught is slavery. Because in schools, we learn his story, which is the European story. We don't learn our story.
This central conversation reveals some surprising prejudices that divide Africans and African Americans.
You don't see a beautiful African woman on TV. All you see is dark, bald head.
Oh, hold on. No. The temerity for you to sit here and say that dark is not associated with beauty? Absolutely not.
For Owino, it's about getting to the root of such biases and finding common ground.
What I think it is that oppression gets to a point where it ceases to be oppression and it now perpetuates itself as self-oppression. Everyone has a story. Even the people you think are your enemies or your allies, everybody has a story. And it might surprise you what that story is. And you also might be surprised that they don't even know that that's their story and that they're carrying that everywhere they go.
Bound tells several stories, but at the heart, it's a story about bridging gaps.
Humanity is more interconnected than we think we are. So that if you see someone and they look different from you, you might be amazed at how similar you two actually are. And that at the core of all of us, regardless of what race we are, we all want the same thing. We want to belong somewhere and know that that place where we belong, we are loved unconditionally.
Owino hopes her film helps to empower, enlighten, and connect all people.
The tensions explored in Bound seldom get airtime, but the full house at the film's New York premiere speaks volumes to the desire for dialogue.
Perez Owino brings the conversation to the big screen and beyond. Mimi Chahaman for Telesur, New York.
Had he not been murdered in 1968, the civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. would have turned 86 this year. Still, in the United States, every year people demonstrate in the streets against racism to honor his legacy. In Washington, D.C. this year, activists blocked major streets of the city and they stopped traffic to draw attention to the very issues that he fought for, issues that persist today in the United States.
The fight against racism remains a significant issue nowadays. With temperatures at -2 degrees Celsius, these activists started to arrive to this park even before dawn.
We're here today, we picked the specific day because it's MLK's birthday, so we're honoring his legacy.
They are part of the resistance and solidarity movement. After taking part in the demonstrations against the grand jury's decision over Michael Brown's case in Ferguson,
it's sad to say, but we still have racism being practiced in America, and it's hurting our children.
An Afro-American is killed every 28 hours by a police officer in the United States. According to these activists, this situation is due to the increasing militarization of the American police forces.
So jump outs are essentially where a small number of police and unmarked cars are jumping out on individuals based on racially biased descriptions, stopping them and demanding that they be searched. It's a way that's really an end run around people's constitutional rights.
They march during rush hour, thus blocking busy streets and catching the attention of every pedestrian.
I am going to work after this, and the reason I'm here is the reason that we've all come out here for several days in the past couple of months, and it's really just to lend a voice to this movement and draw some attention to the really serious, deadly issues that Black Americans, especially Black poor Americans, are facing in this country.
According to several surveys, the American capital is one of the 21 American cities with highest levels of racial segregation. I have a dream, one dream, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This part of one of the most famous speeches by Martin Luther King. And as these demonstrators say, they keep dreaming because that dream has not become true.
Francesca Emanuele, Washington, D.C., Telesur.
According to the latest census, a majority of Americans haven't seen an increase in their wages for years. Our correspondent Aurora Samperio brings us the story of a demonstration where thousands of people took to the streets to demand an increase in the minimum wage.
2015 brought increase in wages in 20 states of the U.S., going from 7 cents in Florida to $1.25 in South Dakota.
It has been a long time since the United States did not have as much inequality as nowadays. That is why it is about time to change this situation. Productivity is increasing and employees work more and more every day. However, the minimum wage is still the same.
Poverty is present in today's reality. According to the latest report, 46,000 Americans live with less than $16 per day, 20,000 people living with only $8 per day.
Domestic workers, day laborers, and maybe restaurant workers. They're one of the most vulnerable workers. Most of them are immigrants and people of color.
The federal minimum wage is $7.25, and it has been so since 2007. It remains the same due to disputes between Democrats and Republicans.
Today, a teacher earns about $60,000, the same quantity her mother earned years ago. So the purchasing power for workers in this country remains the same. In fact, it is actually decreasing.
A clear example of these labor disputes is the case related to Walmart's workers. In 2009, they demanded wage increases. As these workers organized, they suffered retaliation from the corporation.
Half-time workers have no benefits. This is why we spoke up, and as a consequence, we were fired. Not only me, but thousands of workers.
The main labor union movements in the US say they're going to decide which political party they're going to support in the 2016 elections, depending on how much they're willing to change in the federal minimum wage.
Reporter Mary McCarthy spoke with a family whose members are currently living in poverty despite holding professional jobs. She found that for them, the high cost of living is making the American dream seem unattainable.
For Grace and Tom, this isn't the life they imagined when they got married 12 years ago.
Certainly, we are considered to be in poverty at this point, even though people who know us probably aren't aware of that.
They are enchanted. You only need to see them by moonlight to realize this.
She has a master's degree but stays at home with their 4 kids. Tom has a doctorate in music and held steady teaching jobs for a decade, until he was laid off a year ago.
It's really hard to get interviews. There's very few of these jobs out there for my field. And I'm competing against a whole host of people who are a lot younger and a lot less expensive.
Even after cutting back on expenses as much as possible, the family is on the verge of losing its home.
And we've pretty much canceled everything that we can cancel. And just reduced so much, you know. Certainly things like holidays and stuff are not at the previous level they used to be. Food budget is different than it used to be, things like that.
An educated, middle-class family in poverty. Economist Mark Schneider says this is a symptom of the economic downturn that began with the 2008 financial crisis.
Part of this has to do with what we call recovery. As far as those sort of real on-the-ground issues of making income, making ends meet, being employed gainfully, the recovery has been painfully slow, and we are far away from what I would call a healthy situation of employment in the United States.
When Tom first lost his job, he thought it was a temporary hardship, but now he sees no end in sight.
It was very humbling, very frustrating. Felt pretty humbling to find myself unemployed, not getting interviews. Say this, since the beginning of this year, I've applied for jobs in just about any field I can possibly think I might be qualified for.
He recently accepted a job significantly below his skill level. He's working as an instrument repair technician, making $12 an hour. That's a third of what he used to make. And even when he had a teacher's salary, life was precarious, with little chance to save for their own retirement or for their children's university education.
Well, I'm thinking about when he was teaching and the income level that he had then, it never felt like absolutely comfortable.
The family has applied for and now receives government assistance to pay for food. But for middle-class Americans like them who've fallen on hard times, there are few resources available. Marcus Schneider argues that that's key social infrastructure that's missing in U.S. society.
It's like investment in those social safety nets, right? Help making sure that when people hit a rough spot or the economy hits a rough spot and it's not any fault of any individual person, that doesn't undermine their ability to then recover as individual households and families.
According to the Global Wealth Data Book, America's middle class is falling further and further behind as compared to other countries, ranking just 19th in the world when it comes to median wealth. For Americans like Tom and Grace, these days even a basic middle-class lifestyle seems painfully out of reach. I'm Mary McCarthy for Telesur in Denver.
Well, that's all for today's The Real USA. Don't forget, you can always send your suggestions and comments via our Twitter at Telesur English. I'm Alexandra Hall. See you next time.